Hey, everybody, welcome back to the EnergyMD Podcast, where we help you resolve your chronic fatigue syndrome and long COVID naturally so that you can get back to living your best life. So, really excited today because we're going to be talking about how to decrease your exposures to EMFs and whether or not EMFs are potentially a problem for you. We're going to be talking with Julia Lupine, and let's learn a little bit about her. So, she is a homesteader, goat trainer, author, primitive skills enthusiast, backpacker, gardener, herbalist, and songwriter. She is based in the Western US, where she often can be found under a rock, usually accompanied by goats and cats. Julia is not a fan of the unrestricted use of wireless radiation and is active in helping EMF sensitive people to find creative solutions to remain healthy and thrive in the modern era. Julia, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. So, EMFs are, one of the environmental toxicities that we look at when we're working with people with electromagnetic, or sorry, with chronic fatigue syndrome and with long COVID. The other ones, just so you have context about who you're talking to, is that we're looking at what I call the toxic five: heavy metals, chemicals, molds, infections, and nervous system dysfunction. And I see EMFs as part of that whole toxic picture. So tell us a little bit about your story and how you learned about EMFs and kind of like what your transition has been and how you're doing now.
Yeah, so when I was younger, I'm 43 now, and in my teens and 20s, I had all the pretty much the list of problems. Like chronic fatigue was a major one, concentration. I went from being a straight A student to like D's because I just couldn't concentrate. And yeah, so like extreme tiredness, bipolar, depression, crazy mood swings. And I just thought it was being part of being a teenager, but it got worse and didn't go away. And just to the point where in my mid 20s, you had joint pain, kind of weird fibromyalgia type symptoms. But I'd feel fine when I was hiking and camping. But as my life call it plans and college life and everything began to fall apart, I made other plans, and because I did okay when I was out in the wilderness, but I just thought it was stress. So at age 30, I found myself living in the wilderness in Utah, kind of living in and out of caves and backpacking a lot. And I realized when I was out there, all my symptoms went away. But when I went into town, and the first thing I would do in town, of course, is check my cell phone messages because it didn't work out there. So I'd check my cell phone and get an immediate serious headache right where I was holding the phone. So I kept holding it further and further away, which helped at first and then didn't help. So it became obvious to me what was causing the problem. And then in town, also, I would get the same problems would come back, and I would get really stressed and couldn't focus, and just felt extremely overwhelmed by the whole thing. And so I began to and I didn't understand what an EMF was. It was this mysterious, invisible force,
Right.
and I related it to the woo woo and energy because that's the only answers I got from people. And then my smart physics friends just told me that there's no way you could react to EMF, that it didn't affect biological systems. But I tended to not believe that because I felt such a obvious effect. It's like night and day. And so what happened, long story short, is, well, for one thing, I met an EMF researcher, an electrosensitivity advocate for people's rights, Gary Duncan, and he gave me some information and pamphlets. He would leave me, I was, still living out of caves, and he would leave me these printed pamphlets in town, which, see, I wasn't able to get online to really research it. I'd get a headache after 10 minutes. So, but I started piecing together the puzzle, um, and kind of figuring out that avoidance made me feel good and being immersed in the fields made me feel bad. Um, and just acquiring knowledge over the years, but it was still manageable at first. I could come into town and work for a couple days and then go back out to the wilderness and recover. And I worked odd jobs, mostly gardening, pulling tumbleweeds. And I was into eating the weeds too and wilderness survival stuff. That's kind of why I was out there in the first place and trying to be a writer. But what made that hard was that I couldn't really use a computer without, I'd get tingling up my arm, the nerves in my arms, and a massive headache. But I would write things on with pen and paper. So long story short, I did okay for a few years of this, and then eventually my health started to really decline, and because I had no money for healthy food and and just the stress of everything. So I had a major health crisis around 2016, 2017, and to make a real long story short, I ended up finding a goat farm to work at where they didn't have Wi-Fi, and through the raw milk and organic diet and herbalism that I was doing there, yeah, I was able to make some money too. So long story, yeah, so I was able to get my own farm, which is where I'm at now, sitting in my greenhouse here,
Nice.
and I'll say my health has made it 100% improvement. Like, I'm totally fine. I don't have any of these problems anymore, like insomnia, joint pain, concentration came back, and I feel completely okay, except when I go into town once in a while to get groceries, it all comes back. But I can handle it for a couple hours and then recover the next day.
Nice, wonderful. I'm glad you figured that out. And I think it's such an important piece of the puzzle. We're oftentimes looking at total body burden, where for a lot of people, EMFs by themselves aren't an issue, but it's just in combination with heavy metals, chemicals, molds, and infections where all of a sudden it's just too much for the system. And for other people, EMFs on their own can be so much of the majority of the concern. And so you're obviously on Zoom right now. So how do you have your home and your farm set up from a wireless radiation EMF perspective, so that you can tolerate it?
Right. Well, ideally, so landlines and fiber optic are the way to go, because if it's wireless, you've got a high RF reading and it's harmful, but fiber optic is completely safe, and even a copper landline is generally pretty safe too. So that's what I recommend that people do is, if at all possible, get their Wi-Fi switched to a landline. Now, in my case, it wasn't actually possible to get a landline. I'm still working on that, but I live in a camper and I'm on, year 5 of my homestead project, and I don't have a house yet or an address. And they would not give me a landline to my camper, unfortunately. So I had to get Wi Fi. So the way that I made that workable was the Wi Fi is 300 feet away in its own little camper on a solar panel system that's only turned on when the Wi-Fi is in use. And luckily, I have a boyfriend who's nice enough to turn it on and off for me, so I don't have to go over there and get zapped. And it's on a cord, a Cat6 cable that goes straight to the computer. It's behind a hill, by the way, too. So there's actually zero RF where I'm at, which is great. And then eventually I might be able to get the fiber optic situation going if I start getting rich and famous from my books, but that hasn't happened yet. So right now I'm just still living in the camper with the Wi-Fi system that I turn on every 3 days or so when I want to check messages.
And so is the Wi-Fi the only RF or the only EMF that you're currently exposed to?
Yeah, well, I'm not even exposed to it because it's behind the hill.
Right.
But yeah, so I am getting some low frequency fields off the Cat6 cable. But if I sit back 3 feet or so, like I am, that's also zero. So basically, it's a safe situation right here. There's magnetic fields if I touch the computer, which I can handle a little bit. But I also have this grabby thing that I can use to move the mouse around if I really don't want any exposure. And then I use a stick to type the keys if I don't want the magnetics, because there's a magnetic field that's about 2 inches or so off the computer. And it's not strong. I can handle it for a little bit, but if I'm on for too long, I feel my fingertips start to tingle. So that's when I know that it's time to log off. But yeah, these things, the low tech tips are often the best. I
Hmm.
wrote an article about it in my Substack blog, actually.
Nice. And we'll share the link to your Substack below. Um, and so then what are you, so you don't have a cell phone?
Right. And yeah, previous to getting the internet, I had to go to the library and I could handle it every 2 weeks for an hour or so, and then I'd be a total wreck the next day. But luckily now I don't have to do that. And yeah, and I don't have a cell phone, but I can make Zoom calls or Facebook calls, or I have a Google Voice number. So those things work for me. In previous, I just sent letters or ran into people or had someone else make a call for me, but it was very difficult. This condition, when it's severe like mine is, it disconnects you from the entire world. It's debilitating. And you can't really get a job or work or do anything. But um, when I'm out here, I can work all day. I mean, I'm in better shape than most people my age that I know. I went for a 3 mile hike this morning with my goat. Um, and, and I work on the farm and build stuff and milk goats and garden all day long. But in the city, I was pretty much disabled. I just couldn't do anything. So, um, yeah, and I think there's people, see, I think it's the missing piece in a lot of these autoimmune type uh, disorders that have become so prevalent, especially since the 90s when the cell towers went up. We saw this rise in fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, the list of things that you deal with on your podcast, and heavy metal, mold toxicity. And I was going to, after doctors failed me, I was going to naturopaths and functional medicine doctors. And in my opinion, they basically also failed me because they told me um, the other pieces of the puzzle, such as, they said I had Lyme, but I never tested positive,
Hmm.
and the heavy metals and the candida, which I did have, and I ended up curing. But um, and yeah, and then the heavy metals, um, yeah, all of that. But the one thing that nobody ever mentioned was the EMF component, and I think it works synergistically with all the other pieces of the puzzle because the heavy metals are conductive, and they make your body into an antenna. I got my mercury fillings out hoping that would be the cure, but it wasn't. But I do feel like it made a difference getting them out. And then I do all kinds of things like diatomaceous earth to take heavy metals out. And then just healing the gut lining is another big part of the puzzle. So it's like you have to do other things to heal the body, but if you don't get out of the EMF environment, it's going to be a lot harder to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and there's research to show that if you've got EMFs on top of mycotoxins, mold toxins, that you'll be worse off for sure. So that combination is also pretty significant.
Yeah, I believe the EMFs stimulate the bad bacteria and funguses to grow, to proliferate and grow in the body. Like there's been studies that um, regular bacteria will change into pathogenic bacteria just through a strong um, artificial RF field. So sometimes just moving out of the high EMF environment makes a huge difference. Now, for me, I had candida really bad. It was actually diagnosed by a doctor, and they said I needed to take antibiotics, which I didn't do because that makes it worse. But anyway, so that didn't get better right away when I moved out of the higher EMF environment. But I found this supplement called Candex that actually knocked it out. It took a little while, but I can pretty much eat anything now. And it does, after struggling with candida for 20 years, I can eat fruit or carbs or whatever as long as I stay moderate with everything. And, but I believe that the EMF component of it was changing my EMF environment was also what helped me to heal.
Yeah, agreed. It's very hard to get rid of infections if your immune system isn't functioning well, and when you're exposed to EMFs, immune system is not going to be functioning well as it could be for sure. So in your camper van, you don't have any sort of EMF exposures, even to like the electrical that's coming in?
None, because I didn't put any electricity in there.
Okay.
Um, Now, DC generally is considered safe for electrosensitive people. I do have a DC powered refrigerator. It's in my shed, and it has a separate solar panel system that goes to that. And then I also have AC power. I have another system that I only with an inverter that I only turn on when I need to, and it's for charge if I need to charge the laptop or charge power tool batteries or run a vacuum cleaner or whatever. Um, so AC fields are generally not safe. I react to regular refrigerator or other household power just as badly as do to a cell phone, and so so I just stand back from the inverter when it's turned on, and
Hmm.
then my well runs on DC. So yeah, basically everything's DC. But then to my camper, I could have lights if I wanted to, powered by DC. But I'm just so used to living outdoors that I chose to not do that. I use a headlamp or candles, and yeah, and like I said, my chronic insomnia went completely away when I started living like this.
Hmm. That's awesome. And so then, do you use any equipment, like any EMF shielding, when you're interacting with like the AC, or anything like that?
No, it generally doesn't help much with AC. And
No.
shielding's problematic anyway because it's metal can conduct a field. It can block the higher frequency stuff, but with the near field exposure, such as from household power, it could actually conduct it and make it worse. So yeah, I avoid the metal, but I do use leather, like leather coats when I'm in town. I have this cool leather helmet thing that I wear too, or wool hats really work, wool clothing. So I'm a big fan of the natural fiber or yeah, natural materials. I sometimes use one of those silver lined. It's like a long underwear set, but and that works somewhat. It can, like I was saying, it might be problematic if someone was using a cell phone or exposed to something close up. The silver line clothing might make it actually worse.
Hmm.
But I found it to be useful sometimes in a town situation, but more often I just wear my leather coat, and that seems to work better. And then also the silver line beanies, or any kind of hat, I would not recommend because it um, it blocks it, but then it's not covering your whole face, so it also blocks it from exiting. So it just bouncing around in there.
Oh.
So yeah, so I have like a leather helmet that I like to wear, but I also have one of those leather biker caps, and I put a wool hat over that, and I find that that helps a lot, uh, more than the silver lined stuff would do.
Nice. Yeah, sometimes if we want people to experience, like what it's like to not have exposure to EMFs, sometimes it's turning off their all the electrical in the house. I mean, they'll still potentially have exposure from their neighbors, but obviously getting out into nature. How do you see, like diagnosis of people who've got electromagnetic hypersensitivity syndrome or issues with EMFs? Is it just kind of getting out from the city and see how you feel?
And that's the best thing you can do. It's the reverse of a provocation study, like the deletion studies or whatever you call it.
Hmm.
That's how you can um, really make it come clear to people if it's a problem in their life. And but so what you do is you go out to a wilderness area and where there's no RF, and that's harder and harder to find. I recommend using a meter, sometimes in a ravine or a terrain situation where it's blocking the cell phone signal. Though sometimes you can find an area like that, but I recommend using an EMF meter to find spots. And now, of course, you don't bring your devices with you, so no Fitbit, no computer, no cell phone, obviously. And sometimes that even includes the car. especially the newer electric cars usually have some kind of a wireless. They have all kinds of stuff. So
Mm.
yeah, turn the car off and camp away from it for a couple days, or sometimes an Airbnb or a remote cabin. It's hard to find, but you can sometimes find a place that doesn't have electricity. And spend as long as you can out there, at least a couple days, preferably a week. And if your symptoms disappear, then it definitely might be an issue for you. And that's what I recommend for diagnosis. Now you look up now that what the industry does to disprove us is that they do these provocation studies. You look up on Wikipedia, and they cite these studies. The most famous one is done by James Rubin. He's not a doctor, not an EMF specialist. He's a crowd control psychologist, but they don't tell you this in the article. And basically, what he did is he takes and there's been several studies that he's done, but he takes so-called electrosensitive people who aren't even people like me. They're people who report getting a headache from their cell phone once in a while. He finds them through a newspaper ad or an ad at the doctor's office, and he brings them to his lab, which is not shielded. So there could be a Wi-Fi router in the next room even. He doesn't say. He doesn't say what the background EMF environment is in the lab, but he takes these people and he puts a headset on them that simulates a cell phone signal, and the headset's either turned on or off. What he doesn't say in the official summary of his work is that the headset's never off. There's even when it's not in zapping mode, there's still a magnetic field,
Sure.
probably about like my computer has. So a near field exposure. So he has the subjects guess whether it's on or off. And they guess about 60. I read the actual paper, and it's roughly 60% of the time that they guess correctly, that they guess that it's on. But the control subjects, they have a more variable rate of guessing whether it's on or off. So that in itself seems like evidence to me that they are onto something. And then also, but yeah, the fact that it's not actually off when it's in sham mode, that pretty much like the paper should be thrown out. It's not really evidence. I actually wrote to this guy pretending to be a person who gets a headache from their cell phone and appealed to his ego. I said, well, I'm getting this headache and from my cell phone. Is there anything to this? I want to talk to a scientist who's researching this problem. And he was really nice, but he basically confirmed he's not a doctor. He doesn't know what the background level of EMF was in the lab, and he didn't know if it was putting out any EMF while in sham mode. So that doesn't seem real scientific to me. And anyway, these are the studies, and there's been studies done by independent researchers. Like there was this cordless phone study where the subjects didn't know if the cordless phone was on or off, but their heart rate went, in 40% of the people, their heart rate doubled,
Mm.
which is alarming,
Yeah,
really.
that's
But
significant.
but you don't hear about that on Wikipedia. And by the way, the industry is who's sponsoring these studies, the
Sure.
wireless trade organizations who really want to discredit us because it's a threat to their business model.
Is it better in Europe?
Every country has a little bit different standards on how much radiation is allowed. The US is the worst, followed shortly by Canada. And I guess what I've heard secondhand is that some European countries are really bad and some are a little better. I've heard that it's better in Italy and yeah, and some Russia, it's really low too. But there's still towers everywhere worldwide. There's
Yeah.
very few places like where I live. There is actually one of the few safe places left. And there's a few, like maybe out in the Australian outback somewhere or Siberia or, you know,
Right.
in the middle of the ocean, maybe. But it's getting harder and harder to find a safer place.
Yeah, it probably depends a lot on the density of the area. The more people you have, the more exposure you potentially have. You mentioned testing and using a meter. Do you have a favorite meter that you like?
I do. I have the Cornet meter,
Hmm.
which I really like. It tests for RF and low frequency fields and magnetic fields. So it's a pretty good all around beginner friendly meter. Also, the Safe and Sound is what my friend Gary Duncan recommends it's supposed to be. Um, yeah, it's about $150 maybe, and it's really easy. It's got, green is good, yellow, intermediate, red is bad. Um, and I don't remember if that just tests for RF or if it tests, I think it tests for low frequency fields too.
Yeah, and so that was going to be my next question is so then what are you testing for? You're testing for RF and low frequency, any other frequencies, magnetics?
Magnetic, right? And I mean, you can get a really good meter for thousands of dollars that'll be a lot more accurate. But just for general use and to kind of just figure things out when you're a beginner, like these entry level meters do work. But if I was really trying to remediate my house, I'd probably hire an EMF consultant or get a good meter. But for me, I just live without electricity and stay far back from it. So um,
Gotcha. And do you have an EMF consultant that you like for people who are like, you know what, I'm not sure that living off the grid is possible for me. Maybe I want to consult with somebody. I've heard of Aura Miller before.
Keith Cutter's really good.
Oh.
He's out of Idaho, and yeah, I've been on his podcast a couple times.
Cutter?
Uh-huh.
Okay, cool. I will check him out.
Yeah, he's very knowledgeable.
Excellent. That's great. Yeah, so then for people who now understand that EMFs can be a significant problem for them, but they're not willing to live off the grid, their kids going to school, whatever it is, what sort of stuff can they do at home?
Well, the good news is there's a lot you can do because people's main exposure is from their own cell phone and wireless devices. So get a landline if at all possible. And but if you don't, then at least turn the cell phone on airplane mode and hold it in, yeah, whenever you're not using it. And then on speakerphone when you are using it really helps. Um, and turn off Wi-Fi at night and when you're not using it. Just doing those two things will help a lot. And then also pay attention, like if there's a smart meter, don't have that be where your main area is. Make sure you're not sleeping behind one or spending time standing in front of one. You can use the meter to test different areas of your house and see higher, um, what the higher EMF areas are, and just don't have those be your main living areas. Um, and a lot of the time, people will do that, and they'll find that the areas that are lower EMF are the areas where they feel the best anyway. It's amazing how the body really knows.
Hmm. Yeah, and hardwiring, if you can, putting Ethernet in instead of Wi-Fi, if that's possible. Yeah. And we talked a little bit about the shielding. Do you think some of the smart meter shielding works?
I don't know offhand, but I'd say probably not. The shielding is so problematic, and there's a lot of
Mhm.
companies trying to make money, but it's hard to actually shield for all the frequencies without also conducting them and potentially making it worse. Um, so yeah, I don't know. I would do everything I could to get off grid myself if at all possible, but that's difficult for many people.
Yeah. Yeah, and flipping the fuses at night to turn everything off in your home, that's one of those things where it's a little bit challenging for all the stuff in your freezer, but that can be a good gauge for people who aren't sleeping well and they want to see if EMFs are contributing. Would you agree?
For sure. And I actually used to do that when I was in a house. I would turn off the fuses to my bedroom, and that made a huge difference. And on days when there were times when they were left on, and those days I couldn't sleep. I'd get this prickling feeling in my arms and swelling in the lymph glands. Um, so yeah, sleep is definitely the most important time to have it off, because that's when your body wants to go into parasympathetic and heal itself, so it helps if you're not being zapped all the time. So sometimes just having a safe place to sleep is enough for people, depending on where they are, what their sensitivity levels are. And I would say definitely prevention. Like the sooner you can start making changes, the sooner your body can heal, and the less likely you are to threshold into, um, you know, the greater sensitivity levels, like
Yeah,
someone like me has.
I would agree. Yeah, and I've seen that with the total body burden too, is that, the less heavy metals, chemicals, molds, and infections that people have, and the more work they've done on their nervous systems, oftentimes the more tolerant they can be, but not always. So yeah, that prevention is really important. You, I believe there are some herbal or dietary supplements that you've used before that you advocate for that can mitigate the harm from EMFs.
Definitely. They've made a huge difference for me. What I would say, my first thing that I would recommend would be any of the medicinal mushrooms, like
Mm.
chaga, cordyceps, and reishi, lion's mane are my top four favorites. But yeah, all the mushrooms really help, because they just help the body to adapt to stress and help the microbiome, and they all do different things. Like lion's mane especially helped actually regrows neurons in the brain, and really helps after being zapped. The powders are best for long-term daily use, and the tinctures are best for acute situations. Like I'll take some lion's mane tincture after a bad town experience, and it'll sometimes really reverse the damage a lot quicker
Mm.
than yeah. So, and then also the adaptogenic herbs, eleuthero, schisandra berry, rhodiola, um, St. John's wort's a really good one. But yeah, any of the adaptogenic nerve herbs, also cat's claw, Japanese knotweed. By the way, any of the Lyme. I'm kind of working on a Substack series of essays about this, but all the Lyme disease herbs work amazingly for the symptoms of electrosensitivity. And to my knowledge, nobody's studied this in depth, but it's a real interest of mine, because I thought I had Lyme. So I researched it and started taking the herbs as recommended in Stephen Herod Buhner's book, Healing Lyme. His main herbs are Japanese knotweed, cat's claw, and andrographis, and a few others. And I was taking these herbs and I felt a lot better. My sensitivity levels lowered, and my ability um, to do well while living in town increased. But I stopped taking them because of cost, and I haven't been taking them. But I might start again just to experiment and see how I do with it. But yeah, I think there's a major as I was saying, there's a major connection between all of these autoimmune type issues and electricity. So the same herbs work.
Right. Well, and that speaks to my supposition and what I've seen in terms of like the total body burden, where, yes, if you decrease the amount of infection that you have, you're going to be potentially less sensitive to EMFs. So, a couple last questions. So, are you familiar at all with the work of what's Sheena Symington at the Electrosensitive Society in Canada?
Yeah, I know her a little bit because I've gone on a couple calls with her for she runs a support group for electrosensitive people. She's really nice. I actually quoted her in my newest book.
Nice. And do you have you tried the that light therapy that she
I want
puts
to.
people through? Okay.
Yeah, auricular chromotherapy.
Right.
Um, and yeah, that fascinates me because acupuncture really helps. So it's like basically a form of acupuncture. And yeah, as soon as I feel that I can afford it, I want to take the training.
Yeah. And so yeah, I think that I haven't tried it on anybody, but it seems like the case studies can be pretty significant for helping people decrease their sensitivities. And for those who aren't familiar, you basically get very cheap LED lights and you shine certain colors on the ear while you're having a conversation with somebody and they're processing through things. So it's a very interesting concept that seems to be supported for folks. Wonderful. Is there anything that we did not discuss that you want to make sure that we convey today?
Oh, yeah, there is one more thing. Don't waste your money on um, harmonizers and stickers for your cell phone and um, scalar, tachyon, basically woo-woo devices. They're all snake oil. I've
Mhm.
never heard of a single. I've talked to hundreds of electrosensitive people worldwide over the years, and just seen case studies from other researchers. And I have not heard a single case of one of those gadgets actually helping. So,
Mhm.
and maybe sometimes people feel a little better, but that's probably a placebo effect. And it's just basically these companies trying to profit off of people's fears and misfortunes. So don't waste your money on that. Instead, buy a meter. And the meter will pay for itself the first day by decreasing your exposures you didn't even know you had.
That's
So,
great. And
yeah,
so does that also go for Stetzerizers and those
no, those
capacitors?
are real.
Okay.
Because they I mean, you can measure the with your meter, you can measure a reduction in field strength, so it's actually based on real physics. But anytime you see the word scalar or quantum or there's different words that they use, but any of those things, we just call them bliss ninny paraphernalia. And and it's just not even based on science at all. It's just they're just trying to make money.
hmm and the scalar technology is mainly trying to capitalize on the Schumann resonance. Is that correct?
Yeah, and the Schumann resonance is a real thing too that can be measured, but they're basically just using a bunch of scientific jargon, mixing it with a bunch of woo woo and trying to sell people stuff. And like really, and a lot of it looks really convincing. And I've written to these companies, but it's not when you know what to look for, because I deconstruct big tech studies. They, use wireless trade organization money to pay scientists to get the results they want. So I've read a lot of fake studies and I know what to look for. And I've looked at the studies of these snake oil salesmen, and it's basically the same thing and they're equally guilty in my opinion. Um, and some of the salesmen might even believe in it, but they're not EMF sensitive. They don't. So, um,
Yeah.
maybe they feel better with their sticker, but they're not really viscerally feeling the EMFs themselves to begin with. So,
Yeah, and in terms of the studies, I know that most of it's being paid for by the wireless companies, but there are positive studies, or there are studies that indicate that wireless technology is harmful for human health, correct?
right. And my book, Your Cell Phone is Not Safe, I go into these studies in detail. And pretty much all the studies show that it's dangerous unless these studies are paid for by big tech itself. And then they either say that it's not dangerous, or but if you read the fine print of the studies, it might tell a different story. Um, yeah, so it's it's just a big scam, basically. It's like big tobacco. There for decades, big tobacco did its own studies proving that tobacco is safe, and
Mhm.
they kept people fooled for a long time. But eventually, the evidence piled up too much that um, now we know that tobacco causes cancer.
Right. Yeah, here's the hope, and the same thing happens with all these EMFs and all these things we're exposed to. The challenge is so many people are, I mean, it's a function of daily life now, right? I mean, you can't really run your business, work your job, connect with people if you don't have a cell phone, you don't have a laptop, that sort of thing. And so I think that the recommendations that you've made today, trying to live in that context, I know for me, where, I can't go live off of the grid right now with everything that I have going on. I think it's really important to do what we can and to, like you said, invest in a meter and see how bad is it for me and how do I feel when I'm out in the boonies. I think that that can give us a lot of data and encourage us to start making some changes.
Exactly. And it's like I tell people, don't panic. You probably won't have to go live in a cave, but you can reduce your exposure as much as you can and try to get out into nature a lot, like feel the Schumann residences, because that's as important as the part that you're cutting out. Like, get the nature frequencies, and just try to be aware, because unfortunately our society runs on the unrestricted use of microwave radiation. That's what a cell phone is a microwave antenna, just like the radiation in your microwave, except a lot less watts, but same thing. And it probably won't kill you if you just take steps to reduce the exposure. And
Yeah. Absolutely. Excellent. And so best place for people to find you is on Substack. And so we're going to put that link below or around this video, this podcast. And then also we'll put the link to your book.
yeah, 2 books, soon to be 3, and they can be found on Amazon.
Excellent. And then it sounds like you work with people one-on-one in consultation to help them optimize their environments at home in terms of EMFs.
I do. And now I'm not an EMF consultant, though. For more technical advice, you'd actually want to hire somebody to come to your house and measure the fields. But I can give basic advice, just lifestyle, inspirational, and then just ideas on how to reduce, and also how to live off grid, how to alternatives to some of these exposures I can help with.
That's excellent. And so people would just go to your Substack and then message you from there.
That sounds good. I have Facebook too, but
Okay.
if I don't know why somebody's friending me, I might friend them or not, depending on my mood that day. But you get a lot of random people. But if a person messages me and tells me why, then I would friend them.
Excellent. And they go into that people I don't know bucket. And so it's hard to kind of like find them. So yeah.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Well, Julia, this has been really educational. I really appreciate you taking the time to hang out with me today.
Yeah, for sure. You too. Thanks.
Thank you. So if you have chronic fatigue, whether it's from long COVID or chronic fatigue syndrome, go ahead and click the link below to watch my latest masterclass, where I go deep into our 4-step process that has helped thousands of others resolve their symptoms naturally. After you watch that video, if you're interested in seeing if we're a good fit to work together, you can then get on a free call with me. All right, thanks so much. I'll see you over there. I hope you learned something on today's podcast. If you did, please share it with your friends and family and leave us a 5-star review on iTunes. It's really helpful for getting this information out to more people who desperately need it. Sharing all the experts I know and love and the powerful tips I have is one of my absolute favorite things to do. Thanks for being part of my community. Just a reminder, this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not a substitute for professional care by a doctor or other qualified medical professional. It is provided with the understanding that it does not constitute medical or other professional advice or services. Thanks for listening and have an amazing day.